Jung discovered why narcissists fear empath awakening more than anything else. It wasn't the empath's tears they feared. It wasn't the empath's anger or their emotional breakdowns. It was the moment the empath stopped reacting entirely. Jung wrote, "The most terrifying thing about silence is not what it hides, but what it's preparing to become. You know this silence. You've lived in it your entire life. You see the truth beneath every performance. You feel the emotional undercurrents others miss completely. You notice when someone's smile doesn't reach their eyes, when their apology carries no weight, when their promises are just words designed to buy time. But you stayed quiet. You smoothed over tension. You kept the peace. Your silence protected harmony. It kept relationships intact. It prevented confrontation. But Jung discovered something else about this silence. It wasn't weakness. It was preparation. The empath's silence has been gathering strength, building pressure, waiting for the moment of transformation. That moment is now. Jung called this the breakdown of the persona. The mask you wore to survive starts cracking. The false self that pleased everyone begins dissolving. What emerges isn't the same person who stayed quiet. It's someone who understands that silence can be power, not surrender. Jung documented this transformation through what he called the Transcendent Function. Two opposites merge into something completely new. Your empathy doesn't disappear. It grows a spine. The question isn't whether this transformation will happen. You already feel it stirring inside you. The question is, what happens when empathy stops apologizing for existing? You already sensed something had to change. The exhaustion became unbearable. The resentment started building. The voice inside, your head started asking dangerous questions. Why am I always the one who has to understand? Why do I apologize for feeling hurt? Why does my sensitivity get treated like a character flaw? Jung realized these weren't complaints. They were symptoms of awakening. If you've ever reached the point where you can read people but no longer need their approval, write this in the comments. I see you, but I don't need you. The empath develops 3 psychological weapons during this transformation. Not weapons of destruction, but weapons of protection. Tools that restore balance to relationships that have operated on manipulation and emotional exploitation. The first weapon is silence. Not the old silence of repression, but the new silence of strategic composure. You stop feeding the chaos. You stop providing the emotional reactions that fuel dysfunctional patterns. The second weapon is clarity. Your differentiated perception stops making excuses for destructive behavior. You see patterns instead of isolated incidents. You recognize emotional cycles instead of believing promises of change. The third weapon is boundary. You transform your empathy from a liability into direction. You care deeply, but you care strategically. You help, but you help with limits. Jung observed that when empaths integrate these 3 weapons, something shifts in the entire emotional ecosystem around them. People who thrived on emotional chaos suddenly find themselves starving. Relationships that operated on guilt and manipulation start reorganizing around respect and reciprocity. The shift begins the moment silence stops meaning weakness. The psychology of the mask. How the persona kept you trapped. Jung wrote extensively about the persona, the mask we wear to survive in society. For empaths, this mask formed early. You learned that your survival depended on being the peacemaker, the understanding one, the person who never caused problems. Your persona became a masterpiece of accommodation. You smoothed tension before it could escalate. You absorbed other people's emotional storms. You apologized for things that weren't your fault. This wasn't conscious manipulation. It was unconscious survival strategy. As a child, you discovered that your sensitivity could be weaponized against you. Adults told you that you were too much or too sensitive. They made your emotional awareness sound like a defect. So you learned to hide it. You developed what Jung called social camouflage. You became the person who always understood, who never got angry, who could be counted on to absorb blame and smooth over conflict. Your persona worked perfectly. People loved your understanding. Nature. They praised your maturity. They relied on your emotional labor. But Jung discovered something terrifying about the persona. The longer you wear it, the more it starts wearing you. You began losing access to your own needs, your own anger, your own boundaries. The mask became so convincing that you started believing it was your real face. Jung observed that narcissistic personalities have a supernatural ability to detect empathic personas. They can smell emotional availability from across a room. They recognize someone who will absorb their chaos without fighting back. Someone who will make excuses for their behavior. Someone who will apologize for getting hurt by their cruelty. The narcissist doesn't see your empathy as a gift. They see it as a resource to be exploited. They push boundaries to see how much you'll tolerate. They create chaos to watch you scramble to fix it. They hurt you and then make you feel guilty for being hurt. Here's what this looks like in practice. You tell someone their behavior hurt you. Instead of acknowledging the hurt, they turn it around. Suddenly you're apologizing for bringing it up. You're comforting them for feeling bad about hurting you. You walk away from that conversation feeling crazy, like somehow you became the problem by having feelings about being mistreated. Jung called this participation mystique. You become so entangled in someone else's emotional reality that you lose track of your own. The moment of awakening comes when you finally see the mask for what it is. You realize you've been performing a version of yourself that prioritizes everyone else's comfort over your own sanity. You've been so busy being understanding that you forgot to require understanding in return. You see how your kindness got interpreted as weakness, how your flexibility got mistaken for having no backbone, how your empathy got exploited as unlimited emotional labor. Jung wrote, "You cannot become whole while living in half-truth." The half-truth was that your sensitivity required you to absorb everyone else's dysfunction, that your empathy meant you had to tolerate disrespect, that your understanding nature meant you couldn't have standards. The awakening happens when you realize that real empathy includes empathy for yourself. You start asking different questions. Instead of, "How can I fix this?" you ask, "Why is this my responsibility to fix?" Instead of, "What did I do wrong?" you ask, "What pattern keeps repeating here?" The mask starts cracking. The persona begins dissolving. What emerges isn't someone who stopped caring. It's someone who learned to care strategically. And when that mask drops, silence returns, but this time as power. Weapon 1, the power of silence. Jung discovered that silence has two faces. The old silence was repression. The new silence is control. The difference isn't what you're not saying, it's why you're not saying it. Old silence came from fear. You stayed quiet because you were afraid of conflict, afraid of rejection, afraid of being too much. New silence comes from strategy. You stay quiet because you understand that your words are valuable and not everyone deserves access to your emotional energy. Jung called this shadow integration. You're no longer afraid to hold darkness without projecting it onto others. The narcissist's entire system depends on your reaction. They create chaos specifically to harvest your emotional response. Your anger feeds them. Your tears validate them. Your explanations give them material to twist against you. Your silence breaks that supply chain. When you stop reacting, they start spiraling. They escalate their behavior, trying to provoke the emotional explosion they're addicted to. They push harder, get more outrageous, become more cruel, but you remain still. This isn't emotional numbness. This is emotional detachment. You feel everything, but you don't discharge everything. Jung wrote, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." Part of who you truly are is someone who chooses their battles strategically. Here's how this looks in practice. Someone says something designed to hurt you. Instead of defending yourself immediately, you pause. You observe their intention. You recognize the manipulation attempt. Then you respond with calm observation instead of emotional reaction. I notice you're trying to upset me right now. That sounds like you're looking for a fight. I'm not going to engage with that energy. Your composure becomes a mirror that reflects their chaos back to them. They see their own dysfunction clearly because you're not absorbing it anymore. This drives them absolutely insane. Narcissists are emotional vampires. They need your reaction to feel alive. When you stop feeding them, they start starving. They'll accuse you of being cold, distant, uncaring. They'll say you've changed, that you're not the same person they fell in love with. They're right. You're not the same person. You're the integrated version. Jung observed that when empaths learn strategic silence, something shifts in their entire nervous system. The constant hypervigilance starts calming down. The people-pleasing anxiety begins dissolving. You realize you don't have to have an opinion about everything. You don't have to fix every emotional crisis. You don't have to respond to every provocation. Your silence becomes a boundary. It says, I choose what deserves my energy. This isn't stonewalling. Stonewalling is punitive silence designed to hurt someone. Strategic silence is protective silence designed to preserve your peace. The difference is intention. Stonewalling wants to cause pain. Strategic silence wants to avoid absorbing pain. You can tell the difference by how it feels in your body. Stonewalling creates tension. Strategic silence creates calm. Jung documented that shadow integration means you're no longer afraid of your own darkness. You acknowledge that you're capable of cruelty, manipulation, and revenge. But instead of acting on these impulses, you transform them into boundaries. Your shadow becomes your strength. Your capacity for darkness becomes your protection against those who would exploit your light. You stop being afraid of conflict because you realize that healthy conflict is better than toxic peace. You stop being afraid of disappointing people because you realize that people who are disappointed by your boundaries weren't respecting you anyway. You stop being afraid of being alone because you realize that solitude is better than bad company. Your silence becomes a weapon of mass construction. It constructs better relationships by eliminating the ones that only functioned through your self-abandonment. People start treating you differently. They become more careful with their words. They stop expecting you to absorb their chaos. They start respecting your emotional space. If people started treating you differently when you found your backbone, comment, they sensed the change before I announced it. Some people can't handle this new version of you. They preferred you when you were reactive, when you were available for emotional dumping, when you could be manipulated through guilt. These people remove themselves from your life. This isn't a loss. This is a cleansing. The people who remain are the ones who can handle your integrated self. They respect your silence. They value your words more because you speak them less frequently. Your relationships become deeper because they're built on mutual respect instead of one-sided emotional labor. Jung realized that integrated empaths become emotional alchemists. They transform their sensitivity from a liability into a superpower. Your silence stops being about hiding. It starts being about choosing. Once silence steadies you, clarity starts cutting through illusion. Weapon 2. The power of clarity. Jung discovered that empaths possess what he called differentiated perception. You see patterns where others see isolated incidents. This isn't intuition. This is psychological pattern recognition operating at an advanced level. Clarity means seeing the truth of what's happening, not the story you're being told about what's happening. Narcissists survive by creating confusion. They thrive in emotional fog. They need you to doubt your own perceptions so they can control the narrative. Your clarity destroys that fog. When you start seeing patterns instead of making excuses, everything changes. You stop believing promises and start tracking behavior. You stop listening to explanations and start watching actions. Jung wrote, "Your vision becomes clear when you look into your heart. Who looks outside dreams? Who looks inside awakens." Here's what differentiated perception looks like in practice. Someone hurts you, then apologizes beautifully. Your empathy wants to believe the apology. Your clarity asks, "How many times have I heard this exact same apology?" You start noticing the cycles. The explosion, the apology, the brief peace, then the slow build-up to the next explosion. You realize you're not in a relationship. You're trapped in a pattern. The apology isn't genuine remorse. It's pattern maintenance. It's designed to reset the cycle so it can repeat. Jung observed that empaths often mistake emotional intensity for emotional depth. Someone who creates constant drama feels passionate. Someone who stays calm feels boring. But clarity reveals the truth. Emotional chaos isn't passion, it's dysfunction. Real depth doesn't require constant crisis. Real connection doesn't need manufactured emergency to feel alive. Your differentiated perception starts recognizing the difference between someone who's struggling and someone who's performing struggle for attention. Here's a simple test Jung would approve of. Does this person change their behavior or just their words? Someone who's genuinely working on themselves shows behavioral change over time. Their actions align more closely with their promises. Their patterns shift toward health. Someone who's performing remorse gives beautiful speeches but repeats the same destructive behaviors. Their words evolve, but their actions stay identical. Your clarity stops being fooled by eloquent explanations. You start tracking behavioral data instead of emotional presentations. This feels harsh at first. Your empathy protests. It wants to believe people can change. It wants to give endless chances. It wants to focus on potential instead of reality. But Jung realized that real empathy includes empathy for your future self, the version of you that will have to live with the consequences of ignoring clear patterns. Feeling exhausted isn't weakness. It's your psychological immune system rejecting lies. Your body knows the truth before your mind accepts it. The constant fatigue, the walking on eggshells anxiety, the feeling like you're going crazy, these aren't character flaws. They're symptoms of living in someone else's distorted reality. Clarity means trusting your body's wisdom. When someone's presence consistently drains your energy, that's data. When conversations with them leave you feeling confused and guilty, that's information. When you find yourself constantly explaining basic respect to them, that's a pattern. Jung documented that narcissists have a supernatural ability to make empaths doubt their own perceptions. They call this gaslighting now, but Jung understood it as participation mystique, losing yourself in someone else's psychological reality. They'll tell you that you're too sensitive, that you're imagining things, that you're making problems, where none exist. They'll rewrite history, deny conversations that happened, and make you feel crazy for remembering accurately. Your clarity becomes your anchor. You start keeping records. You trust your memory. You validate your own experiences instead of seeking validation from the person who's harming you. The moment you stop seeking their approval of your reality is the moment you reclaim your power. Clarity equalizes the playing field because truth ends performance. When you see clearly, you can't be manipulated through confusion. When you recognize patterns, you can't be surprised by predictable behavior. When you trust your perceptions, you can't be gaslit into doubting reality. Jung realized that differentiated perception is actually an evolutionary advantage. Empaths develop this ability to survive in emotionally dangerous environments. You learn to read micro-expressions, detect hidden agendas, and sense emotional undercurrents because your safety depended on it. But somewhere along the way, you learned to ignore these perceptions to keep peace. You trained yourself to doubt your own radar system. Clarity means turning that radar back on, trusting what you see, acting on what you know. Your perception isn't the problem. Your perception is the solution. Once you see clearly, you decide how far others can go. Weapon 3, the power of boundary. Jung discovered that boundaries aren't walls, they're instruction manuals for how to treat you. The transcendent function represents the fusion of opposites into something completely new. Your empathy doesn't disappear when you develop boundaries, it evolves. Jung wrote, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." Who you truly are is someone who cares deeply, but cares strategically. Boundaries transform empathy from unlimited emotional labor into directed compassion. You help people who want to be helped. You invest energy in people who reciprocate respect. The old version of empathy said, "I'll absorb your pain so you don't have to feel it." The integrated version says, "I'll support your healing, but I won't enable your dysfunction." Jung observed that empaths often confuse boundaries with punishment. You think setting limits means you're being cruel or selfish, but boundaries aren't punishment, they're instruction. When you tell someone, "That doesn't work for me," you're not attacking them. You're teaching them how to maintain access to your energy. When you say, "I won't tolerate being spoken to that way," you're not being difficult. You're providing a roadmap for respectful interaction. When you establish, "I need 24 hours to think about big decisions," you're not being stubborn. You're protecting your right to make choices from a calm, centered place. Jung realized that healthy boundaries create healthier relationships. They eliminate the guesswork. People know exactly where they stand with you. Here's how this works in practice. Someone asks you to do something that overstretches your capacity. Instead of automatically saying yes and resenting it later, you pause. "Let me check my schedule and get back to you. I can help with X, but not Y. I'm not available for that, but here's what I can offer instead." Your boundaries become a filtering system. They sort people into two categories: those who respect your limits and those who don't. The people who respect your boundaries are the ones worth investing in. They understand that healthy relationships require mutual consideration. They appreciate that you're taking care of yourself so you can show up authentically for them. The people who fight your boundaries reveal their true intentions. They weren't interested in reciprocal relationship. They wanted unlimited access to your resources without having to give anything back. Jung documented what he called the exit rule. If someone repeatedly ignores your clearly stated boundaries, respect yourself enough to withdraw your energy from that dynamic. This happens in phases. First, you test. You state a boundary clearly and observe the response. "I need our conversations to stay respectful. When you raise your voice, I'm going to end the call." Then you confirm. If they violate the boundary, you follow through immediately. "You're raising your voice, so I'm ending this call now. We can try again tomorrow." Finally, if the pattern continues, you withdraw. You limit contact, reduce availability, or remove yourself from the situation entirely. This isn't cruelty. This is self-respect. Jung understood that the transcendent function creates what he called conscious relationship. Both people understand the terms of engagement. Both people take responsibility for their behavior. Both people respect the other's autonomy. Your boundaries teach people that your energy is valuable, that your time has worth, that your emotional space deserves protection. Some people will call you selfish for having standards. They preferred you when you were available for unlimited emotional dumping. They missed the version of you that absorbed their chaos without complaint. Let them miss that version. That version was slowly dying from resentment and exhaustion. Jung observed that integrated empaths learn to reframe their internal dialogue. Instead of, "I'm being mean by saying no," you think, "I'm being responsible by..." Then the people-pleasing version. They'll respect your clarity. They'll appreciate your honesty. They'll value your energy more because they know it's not unlimited. Your relationships reorganize around mutual respect instead of one-sided accommodation. Jung documented that when empaths master boundaries, their entire nervous system recalibrates. The constant hypervigilance relaxes. The people-pleasing anxiety dissolves. The resentment transforms into peaceful authority. You stop feeling guilty for having needs. You stop apologizing for taking up space. You stop shrinking yourself to make others comfortable. Your boundaries become an extension of your self-respect. They communicate to the world that you value yourself enough to protect your well-being. Once you live this way, your relationships reorganize themselves around this new standard. The transformation from pleaser to self-governed. Jung observed that when empaths integrate these three weapons, they undergo what he called psychological detox. Your nervous system starts recalibrating. The constant hypervigilance that kept you scanning for other people's emotional needs begins settling into calm awareness. The guilt that used to flood your system when you disappointed someone transforms into peaceful authority. You realize that other people's disappointment in your boundaries says nothing about you and everything about their expectations. Jung wrote, "The most terrifying thing is not that we are inadequate, but that we are powerful beyond measure. Your power was always there. You just learned to hide it to keep others comfortable." The transformation happens in layers. First, your internal dialogue shifts. Instead of, "What did I do wrong?" you start asking, "What pattern am I enabling here?" Instead of, "How can I fix this person?" you ask, "How can I protect my energy while they figure themselves out?" Instead of, "Why doesn't this person respect me?" you realize, "I haven't been requiring respect." Your body starts changing too. The chronic tension in your shoulders from carrying everyone else's emotional burdens begins releasing. The knot in your stomach from walking on eggshells starts dissolving. You sleep better because you're not replaying conversations, wondering if you said something wrong. You wake up with energy because you're not dreading the emotional labor waiting for you. Jung documented that as empaths reclaim their inner authority, they start attracting different people into their lives. The energy vampires can sense the change immediately. Your availability for drama decreases. Your tolerance for disrespect disappears. Your willingness to absorb their chaos evaporates. They start avoiding you. This feels lonely at first, but Jung understood this as relationship detox. The unhealthy connections dissolve to make space for authentic ones. Meanwhile, healthier people gravitate toward your new coherence. They appreciate your directness. They respect your boundaries. They value your energy because they understand it's not unlimited. These people don't need you to fix them. They don't expect you to absorb their problems. They offer reciprocal support instead of one-sided emotional dumping. Jung realized that loneliness during this transformation isn't rejection. It's recalibration. You're adjusting to relationships based on mutual respect instead of rescue dynamics. You're learning to connect with people who appreciate your authentic self instead of your accommodating persona. The temporary solitude serves a purpose. It gives you space to rediscover who you are when you're not constantly managing other people's emotions. You start enjoying your own company. You realize that peace feels better than the artificial excitement of constant drama. You discover that calm relationships are more satisfying than chaotic ones. Jung observed that integrated empaths develop what he called mature empathy. You still feel deeply, but you feel strategically. You can sense someone's pain without absorbing it. You can offer support without sacrificing yourself. You can care about someone's well-being without taking responsibility for their choices. The old empathy said, "Your pain is my pain." Mature empathy says, "I see your pain and I support your healing, but your pain belongs to you." This distinction changes everything. You stop enabling people's dysfunction by rescuing them from consequences. You start empowering their growth by holding them accountable for their behavior. People notice the change. They comment that you seem different, more grounded, more decisive. Some miss the old version who was always available for their emergencies. But the people who matter appreciate this evolution. They see that you're not less caring, you're more intentionally caring. Your identity shifts from the person who fixes everyone to the person who models healthy boundaries. You realize that respect feels better than pity. Being valued for your strength feels better than being needed for your weakness. Jung documented that this transformation creates a ripple effect. When one person stops accepting disrespect, it gives permission to others to raise their standards too. Your family members start setting boundaries. Your friends begin requiring reciprocity in their relationships. Your colleagues stop accepting emotional abuse disguised as passion. When many live this way, the culture starts shifting too. The collective awakening, new standards of respect. Jung discovered that psychological transformation spreads like resonance through social systems. When one person stops accepting disrespect, 10 others feel permission to raise their standards. When one empath integrates their shadow and establishes boundaries, it creates ripples throughout their entire social network. This isn't theory, this is observable psychological contagion. Your transformation doesn't happen in isolation. It rewrites the emotional codes operating in your family, your workplace, your friend groups, your romantic relationships. Jung called this collective individuation. As you become more authentic, you give others permission to drop their masks too. The people around you start questioning their own patterns. They notice how they've been tolerating disrespect. They recognize their own people-pleasing tendencies. They begin examining relationships that drain their energy without offering reciprocal support. Your boundaries become a mirror that reflects everyone else's relationship dynamics back to them. Some people don't like what they see in that mirror. They preferred the old emotional economy, where attention flowed toward chaos and drama commanded the most energy. But others recognize the invitation to evolve. They see that you've created something they want. Relationships based on mutual respect instead of manipulation. Jung observed that empaths who integrate their weapons become what he called emotional architects. You start redesigning the relational structures around you. The old architecture rewarded dysfunction. The loudest person got the most attention. The most dramatic situation received the most energy. The most manipulative behavior achieved the most control. Your new architecture rewards honesty. Calm communication gets heard more clearly than emotional outbursts. Consistent behavior earns more trust than grand gestures. Reciprocal respect creates deeper connection than one-sided accommodation. This shift happens gradually, then suddenly. At first, people test your new boundaries. They escalate their behavior, trying to provoke your old responses. They create bigger dramas, hoping to pull you back into the chaos. But you remain steady in your new patterns. You respond with clarity instead of reactivity. You maintain your boundaries instead of dissolving them to keep peace. Eventually, they realize the old strategies don't work anymore. They have two choices: evolve their behavior to match your new standards, or remove themselves from your life. Jung documented that this sorting process is painful but necessary. Relationships that only functioned through your self-abandonment cannot survive your self-respect. The people who choose to evolve often thank you later. They tell you that your boundaries taught them how to have boundaries. Your self-respect inspired their self-respect. Your refusal to enable dysfunction helped them face their own patterns. The people who choose to leave reveal that they were never interested in authentic relationship. They wanted unlimited access to your resources without reciprocal investment. Their departure isn't a loss, it's a completion. Jung realized that as this pattern spreads, entire social systems begin reorganizing around healthier dynamics. Families stop enabling the member who creates constant crisis. They withdraw their energy from drama and redirect it toward the people who contribute positively to family harmony. Workplaces stop rewarding the colleagues who manage up through emotional manipulation. They start valuing the employees who deliver consistent results without creating interpersonal chaos. Friend groups stop revolving around the person who always has an emergency. They begin appreciating the friends who offer mutual support instead of one-sided emotional dumping. The emotional economy shifts from scarcity to abundance. Instead of competing for attention through crisis, people collaborate to create stability. Instead of hoarding energy, they circulate it through reciprocal care. Jung observed that this transformation creates what he called conscious culture. People become more aware of their emotional impact on others. They take responsibility for their behavior instead of expecting others to absorb the consequences. Communication becomes more direct and honest. People say what they mean instead of expecting others to decode hidden messages. They ask for what they need instead of creating elaborate tests to see if others will guess correctly. Conflict becomes productive instead of destructive. People address problems directly instead of letting resentment build until it explodes. They focus on solving issues instead of winning arguments. Your role in this transformation isn't to convince or convert anyone. It's simply to model integrated behavior consistently. You demonstrate that empathy and boundaries can coexist. You show that caring deeply doesn't require sacrificing yourself. You prove that healthy relationships are possible when both people respect each other's autonomy. Jung wrote, "Your task is not to seek for love, but merely to seek and find all the barriers within yourself that you have built against it. The barriers you remove within yourself give others permission to remove their barriers too. As more empaths awaken to their integrated power, the collective standards shift. Emotional manipulation becomes less effective because fewer people are willing to participate in those dynamics. Gaslighting loses its power when people trust their own perceptions. Love bombing fails when people require consistent behavior over grand gestures. Guilt tripping dissolves when people refuse to take responsibility for others' emotions. The culture begins expecting emotional maturity instead of tolerating emotional chaos. People start requiring reciprocity instead of accepting one-sided relationships. Society values emotional intelligence over emotional intensity. Jung predicted that this shift would eventually reach critical mass. Enough people would integrate their shadows and establish healthy boundaries that the entire social fabric would reorganize around respect instead of exploitation. We're witnessing the early stages of this transformation now. More people are recognizing narcissistic behavior patterns. More individuals are learning about trauma bonding and emotional manipulation. More empaths are discovering that their sensitivity is a strength, not a weakness. The collective awakening isn't just personal healing, it's cultural evolution. And this shift ends with a simple realization: you already had the power. Empowerment and calm authority you always knew. Jung discovered that true authority comes from inner alignment, not external validation. The power you've been seeking outside yourself was inside you all along. You knew how you wanted to be treated. You understood what respect looked like. You recognized when relationships felt balanced versus when they felt draining. Your intuition was never broken. You just learned to doubt it to keep peace with people who benefited from your confusion. Jung wrote, "Your vision becomes clear when you look into your heart. Who looks outside dreams, who looks inside awakens. You're not learning something new. You're remembering something you always knew. You knew that apologies without behavior change were just words. You knew that love shouldn't require you to shrink yourself. You knew that healthy relationships shouldn't leave you feeling exhausted and confused. You knew that your sensitivity was a gift, not a burden. You knew that your ability to see beneath surfaces was valuable, not problematic. You knew that your empathy was meant to connect you with others, not drain you completely. The awakening isn't about becoming someone different. It's about becoming who you actually are when you're not performing for others' comfort. Jung observed that integrated empaths develop what he called calm authority. You don't need to raise your voice to be heard. You don't need to create drama to get attention. You don't need to prove your worth through endless accommodation. Your presence becomes your power. Your consistency becomes your credibility. Your boundaries become your strength. This isn't about revenge against the people who exploited your empathy. Revenge would make you just like them, someone who uses others' vulnerabilities against them. This is about regulation, creating healthy systems that protect your energy while still allowing authentic connection. Jung realized that the golden rule operates as psychological law, not just moral suggestion. How you treat others teaches them how to treat you. How you treat yourself teaches others how to treat you too. When you respect your own boundaries, others learn to respect them. When you value your own energy, others learn to value it. When you require reciprocity, others learn to offer it. You teach through example, not through battle. You don't need to fight for respect. You simply withdraw your energy from disrespectful dynamics and redirect it toward respectful ones. The people who can rise to meet your standards will. The people who can't will remove themselves. Either way, you win. Jung documented that empaths who integrate their weapons experience what he called sovereign peace. You stop seeking approval from people whose opinions don't matter. You stop explaining yourself to people who aren't listening. You stop defending your reality to people who benefit from your confusion. Your energy becomes precious because you treat it as precious. Your time becomes valuable because you invest it wisely. Your empathy becomes powerful because you direct it strategically. You realize that the people who called you too sensitive were actually threatened by your ability to see through their masks. The people who said you were too much were actually overwhelmed by your authenticity in a world full of performance. Your sensitivity isn't something to fix, it's something to protect and channel wisely. Jung observed that when empaths step into their integrated power, they become what he called consciousness pioneers. You model what healthy emotional intelligence looks like in practice. You show that it's possible to care deeply without losing yourself. You demonstrate that boundaries actually increase intimacy in healthy relationships. You prove that empathy and strength can coexist beautifully. Your transformation gives others permission to transform too. Your self-respect inspires their self-respect. Your refusal to accept disrespect raises the standards for everyone around you. This is how culture evolves. One person at a time, choosing to honor their authentic self instead of performing for others' comfort. Comment below. I choose conscious transformation if you're ready to become the integrated empath Jung documented. Jung wrote, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. You've spent years being who others needed you to be. Now you get to discover who you actually are when you're not accommodating dysfunction. The silence that once protected others' comfort now protects your peace. The clarity that once made others uncomfortable now guides your decisions. The boundaries that once seemed selfish now create space for authentic connection. You were never the problem. Your empathy was never too much. Your sensitivity was never a weakness. You were just surrounded by people who couldn't handle your light, so they convinced you to dim it. But Jung discovered that integrated empaths don't dim their light. They learn to shine it more strategically. They illuminate the people who appreciate their radiance and create healthy distance from those who try to extinguish it. Your empathy becomes a superpower when you combine it with discernment. Your sensitivity becomes a gift when you protect it with boundaries. Your caring nature becomes a strength when you direct it toward people who reciprocate respect. The three weapons, silence, clarity, and boundary, aren't tools of destruction. They're tools of creation. They create healthier relationships, stronger sense of self, and more authentic connections. Use silence to preserve your energy for what matters. Use clarity to see through manipulation and illusion. Use boundaries to teach others how to treat you. Your integrated self isn't cruel or cold. You're empathetic and warm, but you're also wise and discerning. You care deeply, but you care strategically. You love fully, but you love with your eyes open. This is what Jung meant by the transcendent function. You've transcended the false choice between being empathetic or being strong. You've integrated both into something more powerful than either alone. Use silence, clarity, and boundary to shape your world. The people who belong in your life will appreciate these tools. The people who don't belong will remove themselves. Either way, you create the respectful, reciprocal relationships you've always deserved. Thanks for watching. See you in the next dimension.